I don't know about you, but whenever I need a definition for something, the first place I go is the Google machine. So what does our pal Google tell us about what it means to communicate?
Communication is the imparting or exchanging of information or news, means of sending or receiving information, such as telephone lines or computers.
Did we really just hear Google reference telephone lines? Who has a landline anymore? Okay, so maybe that's a pretty good starting point, but it's not entirely complete. So what does it mean to really communicate?
Science tells us that talking to our plants can actually make them grow. Is that communicating?
My wife talks to her diva of a dog all the time.
Probably a lot more than she talks to me.
Although some of these scenarios don't really fit with Google's definition of communication, they're all examples of what it means to communicate. So let's dive a little bit deeper into what communication really entails.
Communication involves 4 components: a message sent by the sender to a receiver through a medium. The medium is like the vehicle on which the message travels from the sender to the receiver.
Seatbelts, everyone! Please let this be a normal field trip.
But the best definition I have for what it means to successfully communicate is when our message is memorably understood as we originally intended. But that's where the problems start. Think of all the points in this process that could result in catastrophic failure. For example, if I failed to construct my message properly in the first place, then I failed before I even opened my mouth. There could also be problems with the medium or the delivery of the message, such as interference, where the message could end up distorted before it even reaches the listener.
We could have external interference, which is when information that comes in through any one of our 5 senses conflicts with our ability to listen, such as
Loud noises!
being distracted by looking at the message on my shirt. Even something as simple as an annoying candy wrapper being opened that prevents me from being able to listen.
Then there's internal interference, which is when we distract ourselves by thinking of to-do lists, plans for vengeance against the unrighteous, plots for total world domination, just to name a few potential distractions.
Squirrel!
Aside from all this interference, there could also be potential problems that originate with us as the listeners. For example, if I showed up to a meeting of potential Democratic voters to talk about universal health care, and I showed up in full MAGA gear, in this case, my choice of attire effectively shuts down listening in the first place, even if my message is proverbially preaching to the choir. As listeners, we come into all of our interactions with a great big set of baggage. This comes in the form of preconceived notions and assumptions. So as communicators, we need to know how to navigate those assumptions so that they don't get in the way. We also need to think about both explicit and implicit messages. What I say, or even what I type, constitutes my explicit message, while my nonverbal characteristics, such as facial expression, vocal tone, even choice of words, what I'm wearing, or even emoticons, all of these need to match my message, because if they don't, that could confuse the listener even further.
Sometimes the sender and the receiver are the same person. This is called intrapersonal communication. And don't let anybody try to tell you you're crazy for talking to yourself. We do it all the time. It's called thought. Now, if the voices start responding and suggesting you do things that are perhaps against the law, it might be time to seek professional advice.
Anytime we add another person to the mix, that's when it becomes interpersonal communication. And this is also where we inject a whole lot of extra problems. Bernard Shaw once said, "The problem with communication is the illusion that it has been accomplished." And anybody who's ever been a parent of a teenager knows this all too well. When we start bringing more people to the party, we advance to small group communication, then large group. When technology becomes the medium for our messages, we call it mediated communication, which includes social media, the breeding ground for arguments and family turmoil. If we broadcast our messages to larger and larger audiences using technology, then at some point that transitions into being called mass media. When we sit back and we look at all the elements that go into this process of communication, we suddenly realize why it's so incredibly complicated. We also start to understand why some people do it well, while the rest of us, we need a little bit more help. And that is why we study communication.